Welcome back to the channel. In the last video, I talked about priorities and what you can do to sort of better structure your financial priorities. Meaning, do you buy things? Because we're all consumers. We talked about that. And do you buy things for yourself first, or should you be really, deferring those things and instead focus, especially in your 30s and 40s, and maybe not in your 20s. I think in your 20s, you sort of have a green light to have fun and spend your money and do whatever, right? I think that's the period of time where you could be a little bit reckless in your 20s. I feel that's actually healthy because I think people that suppress that in their 20s end up doing it in their 30s when they should not be doing it, right? So I think your lack of maturity in your 20s is actually perhaps and if you're watching this and you're in your 20s, by all means, do the right thing and put some money aside. But what I'm saying is, I think it's a good time to be a little bit more reckless in the sense that you should be exploring things in your 20s. You should be having fun with your money. You should not be overly concerned about your retirement when you're in your 20s, because you're literally just getting started in your sort of like your career path and what you're doing. So I do think it's a good time to have fun. It's a good time to go and spend some money and travel and blow it on dumb shit and what have you. It's okay. I think that's the time to do it. I think once you get into your 30s, it's where you start to really focus on preparing for that next step of manhood, right? What does that mean? Or womanhood. It's that, you're starting to think of saving, you're starting to think of a family, you're starting to think of really focusing on perhaps narrowing and focusing your path on your career, right? All the exploration that happened in your 20s, a lot of it gets solidified. And I will go through that in a different video where you should be reinventing yourself every X number of years, but we're not going to get into that today. But point of this is that in that video, we did talk about priorities, and now I really wanted to focus on how to stop the habit of buying dumb shit. And it's a tough one, right? Because we are inundated, and I've been in advertising for over 10 years, and I'm guilty of it, but we've been inundated by marketing, fantastic marketing, advertising, and getting people to think that they need things that they obviously don't need. And perhaps it's also that rush of buying something new, right? It's like anything new, right? Even a new relationship there's a rush that comes with it that just it's addictive, right? And so we're always looking for that next rush. And I think that's the issue with consumerism, is how do we break the chain? Because it is a chain. It's constantly making us think that we need to be spending our money on the next thing every time we get a paycheck or we get payoff or we get something in a monetary form, that we need to somehow reward ourselves by buying some consumer good that we will probably or rarely ever use. And so how do you break that habit? How do you stop buying dumb shit? And it's a tough one, like I said, but there are certain questions that we can ask ourselves, right? That can help us sort of like put a stop to it, or at least limit the amount of dumb, good money chasing bad things, right? There are some questions we need to ask. The first thing is, how will this thing improve my life, right? It's just a simple question. And you got to be careful, because oftentimes we can convince ourselves that spending money on something is going to be good for us, okay? And by the way, there may be times where the answer to that is no. It's not going to help me at all, but I just want to have it, okay? Whether it's a luxury good where you just feel like, hey, I want to reward myself with an expensive watch, or I want to buy myself a nice $2,000 suit. Again, I mean, I know many people don't spend that kind of money on suits anymore, but again, just some ideas, and that's okay too. There are times where things like that are wonderful, especially, let's say, a watch where you buy something and you spend a good amount of money on it. Look, it's something that you can hand down, right? It is not necessarily an asset, but it could become an asset if it's done the correct way. So things like that can happen on occasions, but it's not about whether or not you're buying things. It's about whether or not you really need them today, or if you haven't made the right financial decisions yet, and those are the areas you need to be focusing on. Back to that priority game, right? So how do you stop yourself from buying things that you don't necessarily need? again, you ask yourself the right questions. Do I really need this today? The second one is, have I made any good asset investments to date? Whether you're late 20s, early 30s, ask yourself, what have I invested in that is truly an asset that in 10 and 15 and 20 years will yield me a return? Now, that could be, and we talked briefly about it last time, real estate. You could be living, let's say, in Boston, where it's extremely cost prohibitive to buy a house, and you might say, look, I really don't want to buy a house in Boston because it's upward of $1 million for a one-bedroom apartment, and I can't afford that. Does that mean you should not be investing in real estate? And the absolute answer is no, that does not mean that whatsoever. It means if you defer some of that ridiculous spending that you're making, because a lot of times we spend because we believe we don't deserve any more. This is what we deserve. We don't deserve to buy a house. We don't deserve to buy a business because this is my life. I can't afford it, right? And for that reason, I'm going to continue buying dumb shit. So I remember Tony Robbins one time had something. I had done a Tony Robbins training years ago, and he said something that just stuck with me forever. And that was, is it the resource that's the problem, money, or are you not being resourceful, right? So I think that's the secret. I think it's a tweak in your thoughts about being resourceful, meaning if you have enough to put aside, you could be saying, I can't afford anything in Boston, as an example, or in LA. However, I could go 100 kilometers out or 150 miles or whatever. I can go out of the city and find myself a 2-bedroom opportunity and flip it as a rental. Turn it into a rental and generate rental income out of it. Or live in it for a year, then move back to the city if I want, and then rent it out. Long term. Let somebody else pay your mortgages. Let somebody pay your mortgage. Let somebody pay your taxes on it. That's the beauty of having an investment. Okay, now in the beginning, you might not cash flow net positive, meaning you're not getting any true. It's not adding to your income, right? But it's paying off it's paying off your asset, and in the long term, that asset will be eventually paid off. Not to mention there are tax implications, which you need to talk to your CPA, because this is not financial advice and I'm not a tax accountant. But there are tax incentives and benefits to owning a piece of real estate, and you need to find what those are. So you get to depreciate your property for 27, I think, some odd number of years. That could have changed. So every year, your interest and taxes on your property are deductible. So you need to talk to an accountant about that, because that's critical. But these are things you need to know. So stop thinking you're not worth it and start thinking, how can I take my savings, whether $3,000 or $1,000, and start to pile it up so that I can start putting money aside, and maybe defer that dumb TV that I don't need. I don't need a 75-inch TV right now. My 50-inch is just fine. I don't need to take a 10,000 euro vacation or $15,000 vacation to Europe at this moment. Maybe I could just take a local road trip for a long weekend and have a fantastic time, and take that money and put it into something and do it one time. You only have to invest smart once or twice in your life, and then you can have as much fun as you want over time. So I think it's kind of starting to think in those lines that begin to help us make better decisions financially. So that's really what it comes down to, is once you start believing that you can actually have more, that you can actually start to invest, and I'm not talking just 401ks, I mean truly invest in something that will then begin to yield you some sense of ownership, but also helps you think like an investor. It starts to make you think about money differently, right? When you start to become an investor, you have joined a very unique club. And then it just starts to open a lot of new ideas for you that you may not have even considered. But this is a starting point. And real estate is just one example. In future videos, I'm going to break down other opportunities. Crypto is a big one, something I truly believe in. I've been a Bitcoin investor for 5 years. And it's not for everyone, and I'm not recommending anything. This is not financial advice. I'm telling you my story so that you can perhaps take a few nuggets and turn it into something that makes sense for you and your family. And that's really what it comes down to. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, try to stop buying dumb shit until you've really made smart decisions financially, and you're very capable of doing it. I just think it's a matter of making some adjustments in your thought process. Anyways, have a great day.